So Jared, how does scale affect wildcrafting from a restoration perspective?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think scale, when we're thinking in business terms, right, affects everything.
Yeah.
And so one of the challenges that land stewards, and I'm using that term really broadly, so that encompasses everybody from like the Forest Service and the BLM to small nonprofits like ourselves, is recognizing that native plants and plants period have economic value. And yeah, I have to imagine that is an evolution that you've seen in the herbal world.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And there are more like squares and normies talking about using herbal remedies than I ever knew of as a kid raised by hippies.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, I think that when we introduce those economic factors into those relationships with plants, we have to be really careful. And so, I think that there are ways to have wildcrafting and harvest of native plants and in these habitats that are sensitive and that have all sorts of other pressures that are affecting them, that is responsible. But it requires cultivating that relationship in a way that isn't like a couple years of book learning about those plants. It's years of watching that plant and harvesting just what you need from that plant and seeing how it responds. There are instances where, you could take an entire individual from a patch of 200 individuals, and more than likely that's not going to have a lasting deleterious effect on that community. But I think that when we're thinking about harvesting plant materials to be used for products that are going to then be used by a lot of people who don't necessarily have those relationships with those plants, that the amount of care that we put into that first step of the process, which is, knowing the landscapes that we're on, finding that plant and taking that material from that plant, the more care that is put into that process, the better. And I think that there are ways that those of us in the conservation community who, might overlap into the herbal community, but where this land stewardship work is really our home, we have a lot of knowledge and expertise that we would love to share with folks who want to be active in these landscapes. So, I think that we have dealt with locally, observing instances where folks have come through in public lands, the commons, places that are supposed to be for all of us, and taken every single Oregon grape branch that they can find.
Right.
Or even just removed far greater than half of the aerial parts of an entire patch. And that's really disturbing for us, I think, in the conservation community. In part because we don't have yet relationships with those folks. If we knew who those folks were and we were in collaboration with them around their interest in the landscape and what's important to them in that landscape, I think that would look a lot different. Yeah. And there are these systems of permits and and licenses for harvest. And while the process for getting those can be bureaucratic and challenging and boring, it's really an opportunity for collaboration between conservation organizations and folks who have a lot of expertise in what these plants can be used for. And it's a way that we can open up the conversation for sharing expertise across those two communities. I think that there's a lot of work and growth that needs to happen in that. And, you know, I think too, in the work that we do in managing invasive species on the landscape, that there are a lot of opportunities to say, hey, do you have interest in this species?
Right.
Because this species is one that we have interest in managing in different ways.
Are you talking about like similar medicinal uses for a more weedy species? In the herbal world, we call those herbal analogs.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plant analogs. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I don't have enough herbalism knowledge to speak to a lot, but I know that teasel, for one, has medicinal properties.
Yeah.
And teasel also, for us, you know, when we think about the amount of land that we have to do our work on. So, for instance, we are an organization of 8 people. That's administrative staff and folks who are on the ground. We steward we steward 2,200 acres just here in the park.
Wow.
So do the math.
Yeah.
It's a lot of acres per person.
Yeah.
And there are only so many hours in the day and so many days in the year.
Right.
And so in order to care for these landscapes with the resources that we have available to us, we have to consider means of doing so that that have been of themselves been demonized in a lot of ways. So we use herbicide. And if you look at a patch of blackberry and Scots broom that is covering 8 acres of land, I would invite anyone to think of another solution that can, in a timely way, create the space for other species to exist there. And that is, you know, the caveat on that, of course, is that if everybody did, you know, management activities on 10 invasive species a day, we'd have it solved.
Right.
It would be fine.
Yeah.
But that's just not the case, and that's not the culture we're currently living in. And so, you know, there are species like teasel where herbicide is not the solution. It doesn't work all that well. Teasel also has leaves that create water cups. It's actually a semi-carnivorous plant.
Did not know that.
So,
Wow.
So insects fall into that water, and then that water helps to increase the nutrients in the soil that teasel lives in.
Are you saying the water the bugs get trapped in have some sort of solution that help digest the bug into the plant?
My understanding is that there are some digestive enzymes.
Wow, I did not know that.
Exist in that water.
Wow.
And you know, regardless,
Yeah.
that structure creates an environment in which nutrients from new places can get into the soil that's there. And teasel, being a biennial plant too, means that anything that's trapped there is going to fall down in the next year, 2 years, and go to fertilize the new seedlings that might be there. But, you know, our method for working on teasel management is clipping the seed cones, really trying to sequester those seeds and reduce the seed bank that exists there. And then also digging the roots, digging out plants, mechanical removal, to keep those plants from going to seed in the following year. And it was great news to us when we learned that the roots are actually what is valuable for folks. And so, you know, I think that while we look at and work with the challenges of native plants having value, economic, cultural, personal value, that we can really invite in recognizing the values that these invasive species have as well. And we live in capitalism, and where there's a market, there's opportunity. And I think that creating a market for more of these invasive species plant materials is a huge opportunity. And it's an opportunity to benefit the commons and these beautiful places that people enjoy so much. And it's an opportunity to benefit folks who want to make their livelihoods in ways that are centered around relationship with plants. So I would love to see more of that happening. And I know organizations like ours and many others would invite those relationships.
Is this a good point to talk about the Teasel program, or how you want to kind of reach out to the herbal community and how they could participate? Or
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, as one of our many projects, one that we just refer to as our invasive species utilization project. So we have a relationship with Wildcraft Cider Works, where there are a number of heirloom apple trees that are here, particularly in this area of the park, and heirloom walnut trees. We also have English hawthorn. All of those plants have plant materials that are useful in cider making. So there's a liqueur that's made from the walnuts. There's a Pisgah heirloom cider that is made from apples from the site.
I've had that before. Yeah.
It's great. And then the hawthorn palms, the berries that come off of hawthorn trees, are used in other ciders of theirs.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's just amazing to get to see those species, which birds love all those things. The cows that used to roam all over this landscape when this was
the wild cows,
pretty wild. When this was a homestead and dairy farm, they spread those seeds far and wide, along with like sweet cherry that has started to grow wild because of that distribution. It's great to be able to sequester those seeds, make delicious cider out of them, and then keep them from propagating on the landscape. And then for Teasel, really it's been an experimental process. Again, because we as a conservation organization don't have the expertise in herbal plant materials. So, we started to establish relationships with like wildcrafting wholesalers, and really like feeling out those relationships for how ethical they were necessarily, because recognizing that there is harvest of native plant materials that in our eyes as a conservation organization just isn't happening in ethical ways. We didn't necessarily want to work with folks who were inviting that activity and incentivizing it. Right. And so that's been a hurdle. And then also really trying to, like we do in all of our programs, expand the community that we're engaging for that activity. And so last year we had a pretty successful experience in working with Looking Glass School, which is
very cool.
It's an alternative school here in Eugene. A lot of the kids who are engaged there are classrooms are challenging. And when you can invite them into a classroom that looks like this, things look a lot different. And so, and additionally, saying, hey, digging up these roots is really beneficial for the work that we do, and making this classroom a happier, healthier place, and it's also a source of income. So that's been a partnership that we've developed, and we're continuing to develop and work with. But there's a missing piece there, and I think that those relationships that are just based in transactions are ones that don't have depth, and they don't have they aren't informed really by the work that we do here. And so our hope And I would love if this is a catalyst for that, is to engage more individuals in the herbalism community to work with organizations like ours, to harvest for themselves plant materials that are useful to them. And that's a process that we can facilitate through our conservation partners. This park is owned by Lane County, and we are guest stewards here. And there's another nonprofit that operates in the park, and so we have to operate within a pretty complex web of relationships. And so we can facilitate those relationships with herbalists to come out here, be informed about the priorities we have and the work that we are doing after 32 years of stewarding these landscapes, and the knowledge that we have gained from that really long-standing relationship with these plants and places. And yeah, just I want to have work parties of herbalists out here where we're just going after a patch of teasel and being able to come back the next year and see that, there are fewer individuals, and recognizing that's a good thing. But then maybe the next year looking at like harvesting blackberry leaves or whatever might be of use and valuable, and a way that we can integrate that work in a much broader community context. I think there's a lot of space for restorative certified herbal products, where there's there's an understanding for consumers that those products came to them via a relationship with place and a process that is really beneficial for all of the organisms involved.
Have you heard that there's medicinal value in the blackberry root?
No.
Yeah, so it's a very highly astringent. I believe it's kind of known as like good for if you have like diarrhea.
Sure.
But you could put a sign at the end of the driveway that says "You pick blackberry root." That's a Stephen Yeager joke. So, but yeah, I love the idea of work parties and getting more herbalists involved. I know we still have a couple more points to go over, so not to sound like I'm wrapping it up, but if people are interested and want to contact you, what's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, so our website is a great resource. It's bufordpark.org. My direct email is volunteer@bufordpark.org. And I am kind of the one who's coordinating a lot of those efforts. And I think that those would probably be the best two places.
Very good.